Hello, and welcome to Conversations with Matt. Today we begin our first conversation by looking at Jesus' world and what it was like to live in an honor and shame culture. All of us in the modern West, regardless of whether we are Christians or not, frequently get what the Bible says wrong because our culture is different than theirs. If we're going to understand what Christianity actually is, we need to stop misinterpreting what was originally said. So before we can even talk about whether we should believe in Christianity or not, we need to know what it actually is. And before we can do that, we have to start hearing the New Testament in the way it was originally meant to be heard. I want to introduce you to this by giving you a parable that Jesus gave to one of his audiences. He said, "A man had 2 sons. And he went to the first and said, 'Son, go and work in the vineyard today.' And he answered, 'I will not.' But afterward he changed his mind and went. And he went to the other son and said the same. And he answered, 'I go, sir,' but did not go. Which of the 2 did the will of his father?" Now every one of us assumes that the son that did the will of his father was the one who said, "I will not go into the vineyard," but then did, and actually did what his father wanted him to do. The thing is that in the ancient world, every single person would have assumed the other answer. They would have assumed that the son who did the correct thing was the one who publicly said, "I will do what you ask, Father," and whether he did it or not was a minor issue. The point was he publicly honored his father by showing that he would do what his father asked when people were watching. Now, in the actual passage in Matthew 21, the chief priests and elders give Jesus the answer that he wanted to hear, but nobody who would have heard that parable actually thought that that was a correct answer. They had just been used to Jesus saying the opposite of what they thought all the time, and so they were just giving him the answer he wanted to hear. They'd learned by this point what would get the correct answer on a test. There are tons of things like this in the New Testament, and even more so in the Old, because that's even farther removed from our culture. And we get all sorts of things wrong. And that's why I think that studying ancient culture is so important to understanding the Bible, because if you want to understand what something means, you need to first understand how the original audience would have heard it. And in this series, what we're going to do is take a look at what it was like to live in Jesus' world, and specifically, what I want to focus on is honor and shame. Most of the world now, and for all history, lives by honor and shame. Some estimates say that as much as 70% of the world's population today lives by honor and shame. The only cultures that don't are those who are based out of Western Europe in the last few hundred years. That means that there's a gap in our understanding of the Bible. When we read it, we make mistakes because our culture is different, not because there's anything wrong in the scriptures themselves. It's just we're looking at it coming from a different perspective than the people to whom it was originally spoken. There's nothing wrong with this, but we should understand that we are just one more step removed from understanding what the Bible says than the rest of the world is, which means we need to do a little bit of extra work to make sure we're not misinterpreting things. Let me explain a little bit about what I mean. When we're talking about the modern West, we focus on things like success and economics. People try to get good grades, get a good job, have income. We focus on looks and appearances and so forth. And when we build out our LinkedIn profile, for example, we focus on these sorts of things. You notice that there are sections for experience, there's sections for education, there's sections for all the sorts of things that are valued in our society. Now, in the ancient Near East, in the world that the people of Jesus' audience would have lived in, all of these things would have been on there, but there's a whole section that's missing, and that's about having the right interpersonal connections. Who are you connected to? Who are your relatives? And this is a section that would have been added to the LinkedIn profile The only difference is it would have been the first one because it was the most important. So for us in the modern West, we would say, I am who I am. I am the person that I have made myself. I am a result of my actions, what I have done, and so forth. In the ancient Near East, they would say, I am who I am and with whom I associate. The approval of parents, the approval of your relatives, the company that you keep, who are your friends, who are your close relations, these things are very, very important. And it's not something that we immediately understand from a Western culture. So over the next several weeks, what we're going to be doing is taking a look at some of these things and trying to understand what was different about living in Jesus' day compared to ours. Now, as we go through these, I can understand that you'll probably have some questions about many of the things that we're going to say, because we're going to be taking a look at things from a different perspective. We're going to be stepping outside of what we're used to and looking at a different world. So, given that some questions are probably going to result, I want to do everything I can to help you with that. So first, I have posted a link to a couple of helpful resources on my website. So if you go to mattdelacry.com and look at the first podcast episode for Jesus' World, Honor and Shame, I've got a couple of links there that will be helpful if you want to know a little bit more about this topic. Also, I want to give you a way to be able to ask questions. If you go to my Facebook page, facebook.com/mattdelacry, you'll see a post for the first episode. If you have a question, post it in the comment section. I will answer as many of them as I can. Can't guarantee that I'll get to all of them, but I'll do the best that I can. And I want to try to help make this interactive as possible. So if you're wondering about something as we go through this, if it doesn't make any sense, post your question, post your comment, and I'll try to respond. And finally, subscribe to this podcast so you'll be able to keep up with the rest of the series. So today we've basically just introduced what we're going to be talking about. We're going to look at honor and shame because the world that Jesus lived in was different than ours. In the next episode, we're going to look at the two most basic questions. First, what are honor and shame? And two, where does honor come from? So subscribe to this podcast and make sure to check out episode 2.